Good afternoon. Is it possible this is Friday already? What I would like to do to begin this afternoon is to go back and tie up loose ends. Do you know what that means? To tie up loose ends is to go back and take care of things that we did not take care of before. And so I get so excited about some of these topics that I forget where we are. So the other day we were talking about economic order quantity, and so yesterday we started talking about some application of that, and I completely failed to remember that there is more that we need to talk about in procurement. Just 2 slides, but very important topic for us to consider. And these are ethical standards. If you, with your money, buy food, clothing, whatever, I think we all would seek to get a product at the lowest possible price. The quality that we want at the lowest possible price. When we're dealing in an institution, we're no longer dealing with our money, but we're dealing with the institution's money. And so I think we must be very careful in the way that we spend that money. And so, are you familiar with the word impropriety? It's a big English word that you may not understand. Maybe another word that you would understand would be not appropriate, not proper. And so that impropriety has a base word of proper. So it's not proper. And so the word perceived is people think that we are taking advantage of a situation, not only to get a good price for the institution for food, but what about me? What about my pocketbook? Is there some money that's going to go into my billfold as well as a result of this transaction? We want to avoid that. We do not want that to happen. And so as a result of that, we must, in our institutional setting, make certain that we are always behaving as far as our purchasing is concerned so that there is no question. Everything looks good, everything is good. Sometimes there is an appearance of evil, of wrongdoing, and we want to, but not happening. We want even to avoid the appearance of things not being handled correctly. Conflict of interest is number 2. Conflict of interest is where I have a stake or maybe money invested, or I would get money as a result of purchasing from a particular organization. So I may not be getting the best price, but I may own stock in a company. And so whatever I can do to push business to that company is eventually going to be good for me and my amount of money that I get. So we want to avoid a conflict of interest. Now, it may not only be me, it may be my wife who has an interest in that, and I know that she has, and so I try to do something for her in terms of financial return. Or I may have a friend who I know has a financial interest in this company, and so I buy from them without regard for what is best for the institution. So there are many examples of conflict of interest. In my work, and I'm sure that you will see this eventually in your work, but I have to sign every year that I do not have a conflict of interest in anything related to my work. I don't purchase anything, I don't spend money, but I can, through influence or through decision making that I do, I can benefit another organization that will eventually affect my profitability. So conflict of interest is something that we need to avoid as well. The next is issues of influence. We kind of talked about this a little bit in terms of conflict of interest, but an issue of influence is all of us have influence. Some maybe more than others. But this influence that we have can lead people to behave in particular situations, maybe in ways that we really don't want them to occur. And so we are working then to make certain that we use the power and the influence that we have only for good rather than for bad, or situations that are bringing questions to the minds of people. The other standard that we have is that we have a responsibility to our employer in everything that we do. And it begins with the job description. The owner, the manager, the person who has hired us to do particular duties that are found on the job description. If we are not doing that, are we in an ethical situation of not doing what we said that we would do? So we are not fulfilling our verbal contract with the employer. I see this rather often, where people are not fulfilling the real intent of their job. They may do it superficially, just on the surface, but they don't go down and do a really good job in working for their employer. Supplier and customer relationships. We can spend the rest of the day talking about this if we chose. I choose not to do that, but we'll at least talk about it for a little while. Have any of you ever been in a situation where you have been involved in purchasing for someone else? I have done a little bit, not very much, but a little bit. I have been in situations where, as a part of a team, not the purchaser, but more in management, we have gone and visited a vendor where they have taken us through their facility, shown us all of their equipment, show us how they handle the goods that they have, where it comes in, how it's processed, and how it is delivered to us. So this is a way in which they are trying to influence our behavior. The vendor is trying to influence us, that even though we are current customers, what they want is for us to continue to be a good customer. After the tour, after a lot of discussion, they take us out to dinner. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It's good? You like the dinner. But what does that do to the independence that the purchaser must maintain in order to make certain that they are making the very best decision for the organization? I have known of organizations that are premier organizations. They are wonderful, wonderful organizations. Their prices are a little bit higher than the rest of the competition. But the quality of their products are also higher. So in terms of cost per serving, I felt that we were getting a better bargain by going with the more expensive product, because it's not how much we pay for the product, it's how much our cost per serving is of all of the foods that we buy from that vendor. So, it's this vendor that took us out to dinner. Does that establish a requirement or an obligation that we still continue to purchase from that vendor? It doesn't, but at the same time, there's this feeling, we're going to, I will pat your back and you will pat my back, and we will be a team. We will work together. But in doing so, we lose some identity, we lose some independence, and we lose freedom. Is really what we are losing. But if we're getting good value, we've got to make certain. But this is where the real but comes in. If there is another vendor, when we evaluate at the end of the year, and they have equal quality at a lower price, do we have an obligation to stay with the original vendor, or can we change vendors? We must change vendors if we are going to maintain really good supplier-customer relationships.
Make an invitation to dinner to the last vendor, the old vendor, and everything will be equal.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. There are situations where a vendor will say, if you buy 30 cases of this product from us, we will give you a television set. I'm sorry? Or discount, yeah. Mm-hmm. Or discount, Now, with a discount, I don't have a problem with that. But with the television, I would rather have the discount. But I buy the 30 cases because we were going to buy them anyway, and so they give us the television. What happens to the television? Who gets it?
You sell it.
You sell it.
And split the money.
Okay.
Our margin will be here.
Well, that is a legitimate thing that could be done. You could receive it, you could sell it, and you could then put that money into your food budget as a reduction of your food cost. When I was director of nutritional service, and this happened, because it really does happen, it may not be a television, it may be something else, we kept it because we were going to use that product anyway. It did not, I say this carefully, because I don't think it influenced us in terms of buying more of the product than what we really needed. What did we do with all of these things? There may have been radios and CD players and things that are valued somewhere in the neighborhood of a 300 lei, something in that neighborhood. What we did is that at Christmas time, we had an employee Christmas party. And so we would have a drawing. So everyone in the department had an equal chance to get a whole lot of things that we had gotten over the years. And so there were gifts then that were given to employees who were drawn at random. Is that ethical?
Yes.
You said yes? Yeah. So it did not influence, well, I won't use that word. I don't think it influenced us. But at the same time, it did not benefit me. I'll tell you a personal story where I did get a benefit. I was very young, and the vendor, the salesman for the vendor that we used said, what are you doing Thursday afternoon? I'll give you some tickets to the baseball game. I said, sure. And so my wife and I went to the baseball game. I wasn't very happy at that baseball game, to be honest with you. But
Your wife was.
But I learned a very valuable lesson that day. And so I've been very, very careful. Last Monday, I had a salesman, our regular salesman, come to our schoolroom, and we did a can cutting, as we were talking about. And so he did the can cutting, and we looked at the quality of the food. And then when he was through, I said, what would you like done with the food? Because he just walked off and left it. And so we used it for meals that we were preparing for the next day. And I think there's still maybe some in the refrigerator that I've got to take care of, but I think it's probably pretty well gone by now. I hope so anyway. There's another area that I think we need to talk about in terms of customer relations with a vendor, and that's what happens at Christmas time. The vendor will bring gifts. Like what kind of gifts? Chocolate. What happens to those gifts? Do they go home and sit on my table? I don't think so. The proper thing, in my opinion, is that that is put into the work area so that every employee has an opportunity to have some good chocolate. So that is some of the ways in which we can handle proper vendor, employer, and customer relations. On Wednesday of this week, day before yesterday, our students went to a food show put on by our vendor. It is a very, very large food show with maybe 250 to 300 vendors who come and show their product. And the purpose of this is for the purchaser to go and evaluate products. And since it's all in one place, it is much more convenient for the vendors and for the people that they represent. But what happens in these food shows is that samples of food are given out, most of them small samples that you can immediately eat. But there are loaves of bread, there are any number of things that go home in people's bags. Is that improper relationship between the vendor and the purchaser?
I don't think so. It's a show.
I think there is a difference between a gift that the vendor gives, and this is the vendor from the manufacturer. So there is no obligation that is established between you and the vendor that you will buy it. It is just a way in which you can become more familiar with the product. And these people are so anxious to get their product into your bag that you'll take it home or take it to your kitchen and experiment with it. And I think that that is a valid thing to do. So that is the first part of ethical standards, but we've got another one that we've got to look at as well. Sustainability and responsibility socially. Do we have a responsibility socially to our community as an employer? I'm not necessarily talking about purchasing now, but I'm just talking about the way in which we are perceived in the community. I think that has ethical issues as well. Some examples that we could consider and discuss. The organization does a massive layoff of people. Does that happen in Romania? It happens at our house as well. What have we done socially to the community? Putting a number of people out of work. And so, being that they are out of work, then the government then has to support them rather than them working. As a result of losing your job, you lose that feeling of self-confidence, of feeling that you are a real contributing member to society. You lose personal value. Yeah, right. So, the thing that I have observed over the years within my organization is that they will do a massive layoff, and then before you know it, we're back to where we were before the layoff with even more people. But the organization has suffered in the eyes of the community a loss of esteem, a loss of value as a contributing member of the community. So I think that as managers, we need to be very, very careful in terms of the things that we do that are going to impact the view of the organization in terms of the community. We'll talk more about this when we talk about human resource management. But I think that using attrition, do you know what attrition is? It is people naturally leaving an organization because of moving, some spouse moving, taking another job. And so we don't replace. So if we know that we're in a situation where we have to reduce, there is a large enough turnover within the organization that you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in smaller pieces and begin sooner and make it last a little bit longer. And I think there's some value in doing that and maintaining social responsibility. Sustainability. Do you know what that means? I'm not sure I do. But the way in which it's used is that you make decisions and you behave in such a way that the organization will continue to function. You make decisions for the continued existence of an organization. One of the issues that we have in our university is that when a new program comes up, a new profession comes up, like we began one this year in orthotics and prosthesis. And one of the questions that came about is, what is the sustainability of this program? Is it going to be a program that will have a few students to begin with, and then after that, no one's interested? Well, it turned out to be the exact opposite. They filled the program with more students than they really were planning on, and in terms of next year, their program is already full, and they have about another 50% more that they're bringing on. So sustainability was not an issue in this department and in this program. And so I think we have an obligation to look at the way in decisions that we make that are going to impact the long-term existence of an organization, as long as that organization is contributing in an ethical way to the overall organization. confidential and proprietary information. Is it ethical? You give a grocery list to 4 vendors, and you have each of them independently determine what their cost of those food items will be. And so you come up with 2 vendors that are relatively close. The other ones are completely off the wall. But there are 2 that are fairly close. One is lower, but the other one is just a little bit higher. But you would really rather work with this one that's just a little bit higher. So you go to that organization and said, this other vendor says that they will do it for this amount of money. Will you match it? And in fact, I'll tell you what their prices are so that you can make adjustments. Is it appropriate to share information about your employees with other employees? Well, no, we know that. That's not something that we're going to do, but that is an extension of this confidential and proprietary information. Reciprocity. Do you know what that is? Okay. I think it's good to have some reciprocity. One of the things that I hope will happen is that dietetic organizations around this world will recognize one another as long as the standards are equivalent. So whether you go to school in the United States or in Romania or in Kenya, if you meet the same standards, we will all recognize graduates of that program as being equally competent. And so that would be an example of reciprocity. But in terms of purchasing, it may have a positive feeling or it may have a negative feeling in terms of, if you do this for me, I will do this other thing for you. It's again kind of like we were talking about before in terms of patting one another's back. What's good for you is good for me, but there may be an appearance of wrongdoing in this. One of the things that I think is important as we look at these ethical situations is that we maintain good, outstanding, excellent working relationships with all of the vendors, that we not cut other vendors off and that we would say, we'll never work with you again. I don't think that's really where we need to be. The better model, I believe, is what we were talking about in terms of total quality management. And I was talking about our special events organization within the food service that does special events, and they have a party supply store that comes in and sets the tables, sets the chairs, rent china from them, flatware, everything, the decorations. And so as they work together, that is a situation where what is good for the food service organization is also good for the party company. And as I indicated, as you look at them working together as a team, you don't know where one organization ends and the other one begins. It's not like this, it's like this. And I think that's the kind of reciprocity that we need. The last one has to do with laws and regulations and trade agreements. There are as many laws and regulations as there is pieces of paper, I think, to write them on. And I think we have an obligation as managers to know basically what those regulations are. But I think in summarizing all of these regulations is, I'm going to treat others as the way that I want to be treated is really, I think, the basis of what is being said in many of these regulations. But we need to abide by these laws and by these regulations. I think there are a number of situations that I could tell you, and I think that I will tell you one in just a moment. And we'll talk about professional competence. And then we'll come back with what I hope is an all-encompassing story about ethics and behavior. Professional competence. I think that we need to be as competent as possible. And in terms of examinations, in terms of the way in which we learn on a daily basis, that we develop the skills and the competencies necessary that we can be the finest professional that we can be. I think we have that obligation. One of the situations that we have professionally in the United States is that we have a national test, like you. And this national test is important for actually performing in the profession, as I think here. Is it appropriate that students who have taken the test in the past give a list of questions to students who are going to be taking the test this year? Is that ethical? Now, as long as, in our school, I do not give tests back. In other schools that I have been in, tests always go back. And so there are files and files of old tests. A new test is made each time, completely different problems. And so as long as the test is made new each time, there's probably not a problem. There's not a problem as far as ethics is concerned. But if you're using a test to measure competence and professionalism, and everyone knows the questions before we come into the test, what is it really measuring? Probably it's measuring your ability to network and get those questions, and not really measuring your professional competence. So we have to sign when we take the examination and even apply for the organization that we will not secure nor will we share any information about the exam with anybody else. Particularly as a teacher, I have a professional obligation not to ask students what was on the exam. The examination is based upon competencies that are communicated beforehand. And so as a teacher, I should not ask. As a teacher, I do ask. But I do not think that I'm breaking confidentiality issues. Because the question that I ask is, was there anything on the exam that you had never heard about before? And I ask that question consistently. And they just answer yes or no. They don't tell me necessarily what it was. But I'm using that as a measure to see how well our teaching of the competencies is being done. I've only had one person say there was one thing that I had no idea what it was. And then he told me what it was. It's Johari's window. Have you ever heard of Johari's window? It has nothing to do with dietetics at all. It has more to do with psychology. And so how that got onto the exam, I really don't know. But I have not added Johari's window to our curriculum. What Johari's window is looking at oneself and is recognizing the fact that there are things that I know about myself that nobody else knows. And the opposite of that is that there are things about me that everybody knows, but I don't know anything about. That's the thing that scares me. And then there are things that we all share in terms of knowledge. And so I don't know where that came about as far as teaching. It was not in the competencies, but somebody somewhere thought that was important. Because the exam is a national exam, is written by a panel of experts, and I have never seen the exam. I've never taken the dietetics test. The dietetics test began in 1970, and I finished my training in 1969. So we all got registered dietitian status without taking the registration exam.
After years of school, after school, is this exam?
No. The exam is done by a contractor.
Oh, yeah.
And so the contractor is ACT, American College Testing, and from Iowa. And so they help develop the test. So the panel of experts go to Iowa or to Chicago, they write the test, and then the test is validated. And that's why they don't want the questions out. But there are individuals who are not educators, but entrepreneurs, who will go to students who have gone through their review sessions and they say, write down 20 of the questions that you remember.
Why?
20.
Why?
Why? Because what they do then is put all of these questions together, and at the conclusion of their review session, they will give this test. And then you get a copy of the test, and so you can review the questions and make sure that you know. Personally, as an educator, I don't think reviewing questions is the way to prepare for an exam, because you have no assurance that those questions are going to be on the exam, because the questions are randomly drawn from a bank. So many percents of the questions come from various domains. And so you have very little chance that the same question is going to be asked, though you have a copy of that's going to be on your exam. Since we're on the topic, the examination is given via computer, and it is automatically scored, and at the conclusion of the test, you know whether or not you have passed the test and that you are a registered dietitian.
So we'll try this also.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Yeah, it's not funny.
So, the story now. I gave you a little bit of it the other day, but I'll give you the full story. There was a school, a government school, a city school district in New York area, where the vendor and the purchaser for the entire school district got together and they said, we are going to work together to put money in our pockets. And so there was a very elaborate scheme that they worked up so that the school district would pay for product that they were not receiving. And so this money that was developed as a result of this scheme came from selling a product that the receiver said that was received, but it stayed on the truck. And then that product was sent to another organization, and they paid cash for it. So it was a three-way operation between the original organization, the vendor, and another organization that was willing to pay cash because they were getting these products at below wholesale price. Yeah. And so this went on for quite a number of years. And so millions of dollars went to line the pockets of these three groups until they were found out. And so there was a major investigation, a major trial, and all of these people were terminated, and hopefully the situation stopped. But there's something that I think that we can learn from this, and that we need to maintain independence in our purchasing and our receiving processes. So the person who purchases should not be involved in the receiving of goods. The person involved in the receiving of goods should not be involved in purchasing or even putting the product away in the storeroom. That needs to be a third area where we are looking at the control of the purchasing process. Now, this is not always done, but I think in order to maintain ethical standards, it's one of the things that we need to do to avoid the appearance of evil. Not that we don't trust the people, but we're not going to put them into a situation where they can be tempted to do improper things. So I think we have a responsibility as management to be very, very careful in terms of the way in which we set up our organization in terms of purchasing and all of the other aspects of the organization as well. I'll give you another situation that we personally had at Loma Linda in the cafeteria. Have any of you used a point of sale system or a cash register? Do you know how they work? Sales are accumulated. And so in the modern point of sale systems, it tells at the conclusion of the day's activity how many of each item was sold. Really a nice report that is generated. And so what happens at the end of the day when the cashier is done, the cashiers in our organizations then cleared the machine. And so they would take the cash register tape that was being generated throughout all of the transactions, and then they would count the money and see that the amount of money that they should have had equals the amount of money that they did have. That's the ideal situation, except that you want to really have a manager clear the machine rather than the cashier in terms of really good ethical behavior. We had a cashier who knew how to clear the machines. They were clearing the machines, not a manager. A very valuable lesson that we learned. And so when it was time for her to go on break, to go on a 15-minute break, she would carefully clear the cash register, find out how much money should have been there, took that money from the till, put it in her pocket, and went to break. This occurred for a number of months before it was discovered. And the way that it was discovered is that each transaction has a number. And so if you look at the detailed tape as it is being generated with each transaction, we found that there were gaps in the processing or the transaction numbers. And so there may have been, 50 or 60 transactions that were done while that person was on break. And so when we turned money into the accounting office, we also turned in the cash register tape. And so they were not really looking at transaction numbers, because you write the beginning transaction number and the ending transaction number. And so if there were some missing, it really wasn't picked up quickly. So this occurred over a long period of time. The outcome was that the cashier was terminated. The cashier was arrested. She went to trial and went to jail. That's what happens when you get caught in this kind of a situation. But the thing that we learned was that we need to behave appropriately and ethically in terms of the way in which we handle cash, so that we do not put employees in a position where they feel that they need to cheat, to steal, to lie in order to get money. The biggest problem for us was that the state came and said, you owe us so many $100,000 in lost sales tax, not income, sales tax. And so we had a huge amount of money that we had to pay to the state of California because we had not collected tax on those sales. Well, I hope that you will consider this as you are setting up organizations, that you don't put your employees into a situation where they have the possibility of stealing and being unethical. Any questions? Okay. Let's go then to the second area that we need to continue with from where we left off yesterday. And this has to do with yield analysis. Let's try to put ourselves back into the environment that we were in yesterday at about 6 o'clock. And we were talking about recipe standardization. And so what we're talking about now is part of what we would be involved in recipe standardization. But it has to do with yield. The problem, basically, that we're looking at is that when we purchase products from the market, and the product, let's say, would be potatoes. Okay? We're going to purchase potatoes. We have purchased potatoes, and we have paid, how much are potatoes per kilo?
150, for example.
150? Okay. So they cost 1.5 lei per kilo. That's good. That's a very good price. What I need to know is two things. I need to know what the cost is as I serve it to my customer, because I'm buying potatoes that are unpeeled, and so if I'm serving, let's say, mashed potatoes, I've got to peel those potatoes, and in doing so, I am changing the value of those potatoes. So if I bought 1 kilo and I peel them, how much do I have left?
10%.
I'm sorry?
900 grams.
That's the 70%? 10% loss. Okay. Okay. Let's accept that, and I don't have any reason not to accept it. And so the EP stands for edible portion. Okay? That's the weight of the potato after we have peeled it. So that is what our customer is going to eat. The AP is as purchased. That is, how much did I start with? So to be scientific about what we are doing is that we would weigh the 1 kilo of potatoes to make certain that that's exactly what we have. It may be 1.003 kilograms. Anyway, so we use that. We peel the potatoes. We measure the amount of peelings and the bad pieces that may be in the potato. And then we also weigh the part that we're going to use for preparing for our customer. And so we weigh that too. So the weight of the edible portion and the weight of the peeling loss should add up to be equal to the amount that we purchased. Okay? So our yield then is going to be the amount that we have on hand, that we have after we peeled, divided by the 1-point-something kilo that we started with. So this yield is going to be relatively constant as we buy more and more kilos of potatoes and we peel them. We can have a fair amount of confidence that that yield is going to be constant. Now, if we bought potatoes for a very small amount of money and we find that there are a lot of bad pieces, bad places in the potato, well, that's why we got a good deal, because we did not factor in the fact that there was too much bad on the potato. I have a situation in which I was preparing a special meal, and so I went out and bought some peaches toward the end of the season. And they were very, very inexpensive, so I thought I had gotten a really, really good price. I took the peaches home and started peeling them. There was almost nothing in there that I could use. Was that a good deal for me? No, it was terrible. So I learned a very important lesson, to buy with quality rather than with price. And so that's what's going to happen here. Now, there are books that are available that give you these yields. I started out by doing it experimentally. And if we do it experimentally, the important thing is for us to write that down so that we don't have to do it again. But once we become confident in our methodology, I think that we can then go to books that give us information about yield. Now, there is a book that was published by the United States Department of Agriculture. And the name of the book was Food Yields Foods in Various Stages of Preparation. Kind of a long, involved title, but it was Handbook 102 of the United States Department of Agriculture. So today, like I said, it's no longer published, but if you go to Google and put in Handbook 102, you will find it on the internet. You don't have to buy it. It's free. I have used this book for years and years, and it's a wonderful book in terms of dealing with yield. There was something that I intended to tell you that I did not. Why are we really interested in yield? Two fundamental reasons. One is it helps us to know the price, and I think I did tell you this. Didn't to give you the second one. And the second one is it helps us to do appropriate nutrient analysis. Because in terms of our potatoes, we buy 1 kilo. Are we going to put into our nutrient analysis program that we have 1 kilo of potatoes when we throw away 10% of it? So we want to put in the fact that we use 0.9 kilos rather than 1 kilo. And so that's going to help our nutrient analysis to be more accurate. So that's why we're spending a little bit of time on yield analysis. So let's look at some problems that we can deal with here. Let's look at bananas. And so what we're going to do is we're going to purchase 10 kilo of bananas. That is AP. I don't know of anywhere where you can buy bananas EP. I don't think I would want them. We're going to peel and remove any objectionable material. So the peeling and any of those little other strings that occur in there, we're going to take those out as well. And we find that there are 3.6 kilos of waste that has resulted. But what we want to know is not what the waste was, how much can we eat? So we take the 10 kilo and subtract the 3.6 kilo that was lost, And we end up with 6.4 kilo of edible portion. So our yield then, plugging this information into the formula, is that the EP, 6.4 kilos, divided by AP, what we really started with, 10 kilos, is going to give us a yield of 0.64 or 64%. Okay? So if we want to do a nutrient analysis on this 10 kilogram of banana, we've got to calculate with the use of the yield what the edible portion is so that that will go into our nutrient analysis rather than the 10 kilo. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Pretty straightforward. And so we've talked about that already. Though let's talk about, it's important in terms of procurement. So if a recipe calls for an ingredient in terms of edible portion, we need to calculate the as purchased weight to determine the cost of the product and how much to purchase. So let's say that our recipe calls for 6.4 kilos of peeled bananas. So the recipe is stated in terms of EP. And so what we've got to do then is to back ourselves out of this and say, how many kilo of bananas do we need to start with so that when we peel them and take all the bad spots, we'll end up with 6.4 kilo. And so we can use that then as our costing analysis. And since the ingredient is listed as EP, then that's going to go straight to our nutrient analysis. We don't have to do anything with that. So 100% of the ingredient will be used, so the nutrient analysis will be based upon the EP amount. But on the other hand, if the recipe states the ingredient amount as AP, we can use that amount as our cost in doing our costing, but we need to adjust the nutrients by the yield percentage. Let's do another example. Maybe I think I have one here we'll do, and then we'll do another example. So we have a recipe that calls for 3.4 kilograms of carrots EP. The yield of carrots is 70%. How much do we need to purchase? So I go back to the original formula that yield is equal to EP divided by AP. And so I just plug in the information that I know. The yield is 0.7. My EP is 3.4. And so my AP is the unknown, and so I put X there. And so I solve for X. So 0.7x is going to equal 3.4, or X is going to equal 3.4 divided by 0.7. And so the amount that I need to begin with is 4.86 kilograms of carrots in order so that when I peel them, the recipe will have the 3.4 kilos of carrots in the recipe. All right? Now, the question that I was going to give to you yes, let's go through this one first before we go to this other question. So in another example, just the opposite of where we were a moment ago, our recipe calls for 10 kilograms of carrots in a recipe. The cost of carrots is going to equal the cost per kilogram of the carrots times 10. But what is the basis for the nutrient analysis? So since we have a yield of 70%, we're going to actually have 7 kilograms of carrots in our recipe. And so we will provide the nutrients then for 7 kilograms of carrots as we do a nutrient analysis. Finally, I think we're ready now to talk about this other problem. Not yet. Sorry. When we began talking about yields, we talked about the peeling loss and the bad parts of the banana that were not edible. And we calculated what that total weight is in terms of an inedible product. My advice to you, I ask you, I plead with you, never to really worry about the part that is thrown away. What we need to focus on instead is what the yield is. So if in a problem that I would give you on a test somewhere far, far away from here, if I gave you what the loss was, what you need to put into your mind is, I'm not going to worry about the loss, I'm going to calculate what the yield is. And so if the loss is stated in terms of a percentage, you just subtract that from 100% and that's your yield. So stay with the yield rather than with the loss. Stay positive is what we need to do. Okay, now I think we're going to go. There are other situations that we can come up with that it's not just a preparation loss. So let's take rice, for example. You cook rice from the raw state as you buy it from the store. If you have 5 kilograms of raw, uncooked rice that's called for in your recipe, are you going to do the nutrient analysis on that raw rice? Why? Yes, all right. And so what happens to that rice as it's cooked? If you were to look in my handbook 102 that I was telling you about, you would find in there that the cooking yield of rice is about 330%. So we're dealing with numbers larger than 100%. So that says that for every kilo of rice that we start with, we're going to end up with about 3.3 kilos of rice. What is the yield as far as the water that we cook the rice in? Zero. There's no water left, ideally. And so where has that water gone? It's been absorbed by the rice, and some of it has evaporated as steam, but most of it has been accepted or hydrating the rice. So we have that. So don't be confused with that kind of a question when we're dealing with yield of items that will enlarge. Pasta is another example and has a very similar percentage of yield. But now there are some losses that we have in terms of cooking as well. Just like peeling losses, if we're dealing with meats, we get shrinkage or we get drip loss, which is essentially the same. But then we have inedible parts of the meat in some cases, bone that would be removed. And so we're not going to do a nutrient analysis on the bone because it's not going to be eaten. The same is true as far as chicken is concerned. We have probably about 50% of the weight of a serving of chicken with bone in is going to be lost because of the bone. And so in doing nutrient analysis, we've got to clearly understand all of the processes that are involved so that our nutrient analysis information is correct. So if you have 100 and 200 grams of chicken, you need to know the form in which that chicken is served to the patient so that you do an accurate nutrient analysis. You want to do some problems? So just to check to see how you have learned, how well you have learned. I'm going to give you a very difficult one. You purchased potatoes. You bought 1 kilo of potatoes. And what is the yield of potatoes? 90%. Okay? You paid 1.5 lei for that kilo. What is the cost per kilo after you have peeled them? We paid 1.5 lei for the 1 kilo. We peeled those potatoes. Those potato peels have value. We paid for them. We gave hard-earned money for those peelings, but we just throw them away. What is the cost of that 900 grams of potatoes that we have left? You get 4 answers, huh? Oh, very good. Very good. What approach did you take? I'm sorry, 1.69? 1.39? What did you get? 135?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was, okay, that's fine. Let me clarify the problem just a little bit. We had the 1 kilo of potatoes that we started out with. We peeled them. And there was some value, as I said, in the peelings. 1.35 lei, is that what you were saying, or 1.5? I may have misunderstood you. Okay, so what it, well, yes, okay, that's fine. And so that's consistent with my thinking, finally. And so the potatoes that we have left, then, are of the value, you say 1.35, so it's going to be less. How much is the value of the peelings in lei? Well, it's 10%, so it's going to be 0.15 lei?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, let's go one step beyond that. We have here 0.9 kilos of potatoes. How much would 1 kilo of those potatoes cost? Of those peeled potatoes? This is a little bit different problem than I gave you before.
Să fie mai scump este, asta e ce 10% mai mult.
The reason we would do this kind of a calculation is if we had an opportunity to purchase potatoes that were already peeled, we would like a basis upon which to compare. And so all we really need to do to calculate the cost of 1 kilo of peeled potatoes is to divide that 1.5 lei by 0.9, the yield. So 1.5 divided by 0.9 is going to give us the price per kilo peeled.
It's more than 1.5.
Yeah, it's going to be more.
Curățați costă mai mult decât un gram de cartofi necurățați. Thank you. La început,
No, that's good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
1,5 împărțit la 0,9. Nu știu cât este cât voi?
Împărțit la 0,9.
Yeah. Yeah.
1,66. 1,5 împărțit la 0,9.
And so to check your answer, we're going to go back to the yield analysis and we say that 90% of the as purchased is going to be the EP. And so 90% of that's going to be 1.5 lei.
Deci ați avut formula. E cu 0,9 egal cu X supra 1,5. X-ul este 1,5. Nu, 1,5 supra X. Și X-ul este 1,5 împărțit la 0,9.
I think you have the basic information that you need to know about yield analysis. The only thing that you need to remember is the formula. And is the formula that difficult? No, it's not. By knowing that one defining relationship, yield is equal to EP divided by AP, you can calculate anything just with that basic formula. Okay? Ooh. Shall we take a little bit of break? A short break? Yes, yes, please.
What is the difference between losses and yield?
Oh, okay.
I'm confused. Ah, okay. Okay. M-am uitat în dicționar ca să știu mai sigur. Și mi-am trimis 5 mesaje. So yield was the way you want to gain and loss was you have lost.
The yield is what you have left.
You have left.
Yeah. So if you had 100,000 lei and you go and...
Yeah, I understand now because in our calculation we are using the losses. Not the,
Yeah.
not the...
Do not do calculations with losses. Always convert losses to yields, and then you will be fine. The yield, loss approach is going to give you a little bit different number, and it's not going to be as accurate as if you use
But
the...
why is this difference?
Why is there the difference? I need to sit down and really... The higher mathematics here.
No mathematics, okay.
Yeah, it's a mathematical issue rather than a yield issue.